G'day everybody and welcome back to this week's episode of the ScaleHQ Podcast. Today's guest is Adam Evans from Anywise. They are an Australian consulting business, primarily like consulting professional services business that mostly services the defence industry. They are undergoing and have already made a sort of pretty interesting transformation into a technology solutions business for the same client base. And this is a really interesting and powerful professional services businesses to go through. They get to know their clients, they can understand the problems better than most other people, and actually turning that into opportunities to build your own IP and a product can really solve that deeply, and then take that IP and make it a global or go across industries and serve other customers and sort of spin it out into its own business is a really interesting opportunity. So some of the things we talked about today, because Adam has built this business 11 years ago, but he's in the last 18 months or so from the date of this podcast, has transitioned out of the CEO's role back into a board role. And I know lots of you listening would love to have a step back. Install management, he took on as GM, and that GM has grown to the CEO. Some of the things that we could talk about today, the transformation they went through during COVID and how they dealt with that from a sort of culture perspective, how they leveraged that opportunity, what happened in their business when they chose to stop servicing a client based on a sort of values misalignment that was worth 30% of their revenue. He managed the capital of the business. Did they raise capital? Did they raise investment? How did they manage that on the way up? How did they get their business development culture going? Like, how did they actually tackle training to build business development into the fabric of the way the business ran, so that it wasn't just reliant on, the founder or, a single salesperson or something like that? And then how did they find that opportunity to sort of leverage their knowledge of a client and their problems into a technology-based product and what's happening with there. So I think if you're in a professional services business in particular, you'll find today's episode really interesting. Or if you're just ultimately trying to scale a business, you're looking to learn from somebody who's had some success, and I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation with Adam Evans today.
Welcome to the ScaleHQ Podcast. I am Sean Steele, and I'm a growth mentor, digital nomad, a massive metalhead, and the founder of ScaleHQ. And you, more importantly, are a founder of a 7 or 8 figure services business who is finally ready to get serious about scaling up or securing a step back from your business or a life-changing exit in the next 3 to 5 years. And if that's you, then you are in the right place, because with over 100 million in revenue growth across my last 4 companies and many acquisitions under my belt, I have spent my whole career figuring out what makes businesses more valuable, scalable, and sellable. And I've learned a couple of things, and I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to share those with you today. So welcome to your fortnightly dose of practical strategy, founder success stories, and expert deep dives to help you finally get a return on all that sacrifice that you've made in your business. Welcome to the show. Let's dive right in.
G'day everybody and welcome to the ScaleHQ Podcast. My guest today is Adam Evans. Adam, how are you? It's so nice to be introduced to you after chatting with Drew Horsell, who's a long-time client of mine and sounds like probably a long-time colleague of yours. Did you guys grow up in the army together, or how do you know each other?
Yeah, hi, Sean. It's great to be here. Drew and I met probably close on 30 years ago now in the army in Darwin, and we crossed paths a number of times over that phase of our lives, and then fast forward 20 years, we found ourselves also working in similar industries. So we've come to work with each other, for each other. Yeah, it's been good. He's a good friend and successful business owner.
Lovely guy, smart individual. I really have enjoyed supporting Drew on his journey. And when Drew and I always ask every guest, who else do they know? Because ultimately, good people know good people, and so you tend to find like-minded people who've similarly open-minded. But just tell me first, tell me a bit about how you got to Anywise. I mean, you started out in the army. Just give me a quick sort of synopsis of your career and how you ended up founding Anywise.
Yeah, okay. Well, leaving the army, it had been a busy sort of decade. So my wife and I got married and went travel for a couple of years and came back and really fell into a natural home in defence industry. So those companies that are supporting the Department of Defence and those companies that are supporting those companies, and did a fairly typical business development pathway. I joined a consulting company doing some training needs analysis, worked at foreign controlled prime systems integrator. I was chief of staff for a vehicle design and large tender, and then ended up in a US-owned corporation flying around the world developing solutions. Intoxicated with the lifestyle, the fancy suits, the biggest expense account, until I wasn't. So after 6 years in that kind of world, I decided that
that there must be a better way. There'd be a way that I can deliver ethical, high-impact business in a way that I can make money and also sleep very well at night. So we started Anyways on that idea, halfway through a bottle of wine with a dictionary, that we could actually form something successful and with a purpose. So 2 days later, we had a brand.
What does the name Anywise mean to you? How did you actually get to the name of the business?
Yeah, so
was that part of the bottle of wine and the dictionary?
that is exactly right. So I put a little bit of thought into it. I thought it needs to be reflective of the kind of startup, globalization, early storming, forming, problem-solving ethos. So that was a bit of a guide. The other guides we had were the dictionary and my anticipation that I'd be working to civil servants. Now, I have a tremendous level of respect for the professional cadre of civil servants in Australia, the public service. But I know they're very busy, so I wanted a name that was high on the alphanumeric code, because if it was going to be a drop-down box on Excel, they wouldn't get all the way to the bottom, so it needed to be at least A. I knew 0001AAABBB was probably taken, so I took out the dictionary and we started randomly.
Yeah, AAA Aardvark.
That's right.
Is well serviced by all the plumbers and sparkies and chippies in Australia, I think.
That's right. So found Anywise. It's a fairly old word. It's almost ancient, and it means by any means or whatever it takes. So that sort of embodied this idea that where I tended to excel in various jobs was in that early problem solving, quickly instilling a sense of purpose and motivation. And Anywise sort of captured it. We didn't read any further in the dictionary from there. We just decided that was going to be it.
Now, if you are keen to step your business up to the next level, like by taking on an investor or stepping back and installing management so that you can enjoy dividends and get out of operations, or perhaps you want to secure a life-changing exit in the next 5 years in your business, well, whichever one of those three things you want, you are going to have to really think about what you prioritize over the next few years, because it's going to matter a lot as to whether you actually achieve those or not. And I see lots of founders staying trapped in their businesses way too long because they're not sure what to prioritize when it comes to the sort of, working on their business. Like, great idea, but what do I actually focus on? And unfortunately, the things that got you to your first million or two are very different from what you're going to need to do to achieve one of those three outcomes. And that's why you're going to love my Scale Scorecard that I've developed. It is a new diagnostic tool which I'm making available for free so that you can figure out where you're at right now and what you should focus on next. But it is not some made up fluff that I read in a book. This is real world scaling, investments, exits. It's my experience from having grown 4 companies by a total of 100 million in revenue. I've done due diligence on hundreds of businesses like yours as an investor. I've bought multiple companies. I've integrated them. I've led multiple turnarounds. So I've built a really deep understanding of what actually makes a difference in you being able to achieve one of those three outcomes. And so what I've done is reverse engineer all the ingredients that you need to think about across 8 key areas of your business into a simple survey. You can take it in 5 minutes. It's going to ask you 35 questions about your current strategy, execution, leadership, team, financials, offer, sales, and support. And then it's going to give you personalized recommendations about what to focus on and an opportunity for a free live growth audit where I will unpack your results with you if you'd like, and where I'll also give you my best thinking on what you should focus on in the next 90 days to build momentum quickly. No charge, totally free. So if you would like to maximize your chance of securing that step up or the step back or the step out, then come and find out your Scale Score at scalescorecard.com.au. It's scalescorecard.com.au, or just go to scalehq.com.au and click the button to take the quiz. And this was almost 11 years ago now, is that right?
Yeah.
And you've made a pretty significant transition in the middle of 23 where you have stepped back to chair the board and installed a CEO, which of course is on the bucket list for many founders when they're growing their practice. And, certainly in professional services as well, of course, in many other industries. Can you, maybe before we get into that, because I really want to start to unpack that with you, I've got many questions, but can you just give us a sense of the size and scale of Anywise at the moment, so people get a sense of what size was it when you actually made that decision, like employees, revenue, EBITDA, whatever you're willing to share?
Yeah, sure. We're pretty transparent. We wax and wane a little in terms of employees, but we stabilise at about 40.
Mm-hmm.
Our work is still very project oriented, so we'll balloon out if a project requires 10 or 15 people, but we'll also contract naturally when those projects end. We have had stable growth consistently. Some of that growth has been rapid in terms of revenue on the back of larger projects. We took the decision some years ago to reduce our reliance on typical consulting or contracting roles where there might be two people inside a customer working time and materials for 3 years. That's valuable work, and we don't say no to that kind of work. But we wanted larger packages, so we started taking on project management offices or significant projects in their own right, including some product development.
Okay.
So whilst revenue...
Can you give me an example of like what would be typical product development that you guys might do for a government organisation in Australia?
Yeah, well, I guess our flagship product is called Fab Hums. That is a fleet agnostic bridge health usage management system, monitoring system. That is essentially a safety system that monitors the configuration and use of military bridges.
Okay.
The spark of that idea came when we were working through a large US firm into CASG, that buying arm of defence, and we saw significant opportunities that were just adjacent to the scope of the contract, and we encouraged our customer, the intermediary, the prime, to present these as good ideas for not just for additional scope, but because it made sense to solve some of these problems as we were doing the work we were doing, which was essentially to buy these bridges. They didn't have the appetite to do that. Very much risk averse around product development, taking on risk, very much pro time and materials, land and expand kind of work. So we sought their indulgence, and we pitched the idea for this HUMS system to Defence, and they loved the idea and have subsequently funded 5 iterations of 5 contracts to the stage now where we've recently launched it into service or into use in Australia, and next month we're launching it in Germany as a global product.
So with them funding it, that meant it became their IP, or it stayed your IP?
No, under the previous, it's our IP, under the previous
Great.
initiative, the Defence Innovation Hub, it meant that everyone acknowledges there was not going to be significant profit in the development phase. We would retain the IP. So the first in-use product is heavily tailored towards the Australian use, but the core of the product is agnostic of fleet. So we've now got this amazing piece of technology that's, as far as we can tell, first of type, launching globally within weeks.
Fantastic. I just want to pause there because I think there are a lot of professional services firms that end up, the business model of taking on projects and consulting, it's not an easy business model to scale. It's pretty challenging because you always have this sort of revenue cliff coming up that you constantly got to manage. So it's, you always got this, number of people that are working on a thing, and then the thing's going to end, and it's like, okay, what's after the next? We've got to win the next thing. And that is, it is a scalable model. Obviously, there are some pretty big firms that rely on it, but it's also, you will have experienced, not the easiest model in the world. But what I really like about professional services is the opportunity to best understand a customer in a niche, to identify those problems, and then actually to become the expert in solving a specific problem in a specific industry, where all of a sudden you become the expert because you understand the problems. You should understand the problems better than anyone else because of the work that you're doing in there. And that tends to be a real catalyst for a future stage of growth for a professional services firm, because then they get better and better known. They often end up with recurring revenue rather than project revenue. Like, a whole bunch of things start to change around the business when you make that transition. That's really exciting that yours is coming to fruition. It sounds like it's been a pretty long development path, about to go live. Of course, not everything moves fast in the world of defence. How do you think it's going to change your business going forward?
Well, significantly. It's all about timing, right? So over the next few years, not that we seek to profit from war and conflict, but the fact is that over the next few years, most Northern Hemisphere militaries of note will be buying and replacing their military bridges. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars worth of recapitalisation of bridging equipment. they are all starting to talk about the need to explore health usage monitoring systems to better configure and better maintain the performance of those bridges. So there is a small chance, it's a chance though, that this product has serendipitously landed at the best possible time to solve numerous problems in those bridge recapitalizations in the future fleets. If that were to occur, and we were to be picked up by just one of the larger militaries, it would be it'd be a complete evolution of the company, such that we would need to spin the product out.
Yes, significant tailwind. I've just watched, there's another ScaleHQ client going through similar transition. They were in a technical area. They're basically the sort of one of the major installers of wind farms. But, these gigantic pieces of equipment still, only up until recently, when they're bringing these pieces down, we're still, move a bit to the left, move a bit to the right, and the actual monitoring inside the systems, no lasers, no sort of drones enabling the dropping of these huge pieces of equipment, which of course are very high risk if you get them wrong. And so similar, services business, doing a great job, all of a sudden went, hang on a second, this could be done much better. In the space of 12 months, had a minimum viable product, all of a sudden the business is exploding because they see a really niche problem, but it's a big enough industry and there's a huge tailwind behind it. And I just love these stories in professional services where this happens. Can you talk to me a bit about, that sounds like you've got some pretty significant changes coming up, Adam. How are you thinking about, because that often creates also a different set of experience and wisdom requirements around the business. Like all of a sudden you've got very new strategic issues to solve. How do you think about making sure you got the right support around you as a CEO, as a chairman? How do you think about your board composition? Do you use advisory boards? Is it only governance board? Like, how will you wrestle with that challenge as that opportunity starts to take hold?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question, and it's one I've watched Drew's journey with you. The real benefit of having relatively independent but well-informed, well-selected, well-crafted advisory committees, advisory boards, helping lead a staff decision process. I'm really comfortable with staff-led decisions. Drew and I went through a system where we would rely quite heavily on, if you like, an intent, and then rely on staff and peers to help us solve the design, the solution, and solve the decision-making along the way. My experience in business was a little, initially, it was me on a 20-day contract, right? So I was the decision maker, and I didn't really have to seek too much wisdom until I wasn't the only person. I didn't have a contract, and then I had 5 people working for me, and all of a sudden this boom or bust. The experience led me to seek out mentorship, and at the time I called them mentors. I had a couple of people that were in senior roles in defence industry that I'd come to really appreciate and value their insights. And I set up a regular monthly call, though not as a collective, it was always just one-on-one. And concurrently, there was a few of us that set up these, we used to call them junior generals lunches. It wasn't that at all. It's just people like me out in the world of business and just trying to understand how it worked. And we'd all just meet and share our stories. So it was we generated, I guess, I really valued the relatively informal mentoring that I was getting from people who had already done it, and also the community of a group of peers who would share their problems and support each other. Fast forward a few years, we got a little bit more serious about it. We started implementing not just the project control checks and company offsites and updates, but deliberate information exchanges between the managers of the projects, or we set up a principal advisory group inside the company, so executives, where we would set a heartbeat where we would actually go through essentially board papers. Where are we? Where did we say we were going to be? What's working? What's not working? Are we acting in line with our values? Is this who we want to be? whilst I still maintained the mentorship, it also meant that we're professionalising those discussions a bit. And then now 8 years ago, 7 years ago, we promoted Steve into a general manager role, and that allowed me to unpick a lot of the daily operations tasks that were consuming me because I wanted to solve everything. But gave me headspace to start thinking about, okay, how is the business tracking? So where are these opportunities that our sales function can't see, or where are the partnership opportunities with competitors or with potentially new clients that we just haven't looked at, and that essentially helped us create a 12-monthly or annual planning cycle. We would have again these more deliberate focus sessions once every 3 months, and then annually hold ourselves to account. And I took the opportunity to share outside the company with 2 of my mentors again, to saying, hey, look, does this sound right? This is, I want you to tell me where I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. It also helped. My wife is a high-performing humanitarian disaster relief and humanitarian specialist, so she's constantly getting called away into the Pacific to deal with fires, floods, cyclones, insurgencies, whatever it is. So after the company was bedded into that routine, general manager was running it. I was still involved, but very much more on the strategic BD than anything operational. We moved to the Solomon Islands for 4 months, and I moved there fully expecting to be able to just jump on the phone, jump on the internet and communicate back home, and couldn't. So that forced the company to not.
Couldn't because you couldn't have the connectivity or
consultation.
Right.
Connectivity was inconsistent. Yeah. So it meant that I didn't really do any more preparation for them. I couldn't. So that's what all they were going to get. And they thrived, and which was a shock to me. I felt I wouldn't, when I was seeing documents, I'd look at it and go, I wouldn't do it that way. And then I'd realize that document was already out of date and it had been successful. So it was really fascinating for me to sit back and realize that actually I may not even be the most important cog in this wheel anymore. Came back. We did it again a few years later into Fiji. And at that time we thought that I was going for a couple of years. So we promoted Steve into the CEO slot. Largely a lot of the same functions. I imagine to appreciate this. If you're not raising capital, you sort of grow organically. So the GM, if it's the right person to be CEO, it's really just throwing more responsibility on. Not too many more resources, but more responsibility. And we came back from there into the pandemic. So I came back having not really had a lot to do with the operations of the company, not sure what was going to happen, whether we were going to be literally losing people through sickness and death. The economy was tanking. No one knew what was going on. So I came back expecting potentially to be carving up whatever's going to be left of the business once all of that had resolved. But once again, they thrived. We made a decision. I got the executive of the company to sit down and decide how we want to be remembered. And we all agreed that there was more that we could do to keep people safe and employed for longer. So quite simply, they presented to me that we're going to keep everybody and we'll all go broke at the same time. And I foolishly believed them. But that was great. It meant that we took the opportunity when staff weren't on task because of economic dips from some of our clients or changes of direction of investment. It meant that we had a tremendous opportunity to reinvest in the company, to put money into professional development, put money into rewriting some of our systems that had become overly bureaucratic, refocusing the entire company on the Anywise way, or what our brand represent and what our values truly are. Up until that point, I'd sort of issued the company the values, right? So I said, we stand for A, B, and C. But this was an opportunity to sit back and what do we stand for? it also meant that we were pushing not just inclusion, but as a result, we found ourselves empowering the company in a really, I'd like to say it was deliberate and inspired, but it almost happened as a byproduct of us asking the team, who are we, what do we do? What's stopping us do more of that? And invariably it was around process and empowerment, decision making. So we just pushed all of that out as far as we could. And within a very short amount of time, revenue went up, profit went up, costs went down, and suddenly we were recruiting when a lot of our peers were. One
of the things I loved about that and that I've noticed over time is that, and you hear the term bandied around, never waste a good crisis, and sometimes that's a sort of platitude because it's like, well, don't miss the opportunity to cut costs and improve your profitability, or it might be more transactional. But I think, and I've been through, I think probably 3 crises as a CEO where it's been sort of black or white. This is existential. Either we sort of survive or we don't survive. But actually, what happens, when you manage that conversation in the right way and you bring people into the tent and you make them, you make them adults and you let them have their voice and everything's super transparent and they get to choose how they play, but they get to sort of own that next stage of the journey. I've never seen cultures transform so positively, so quickly, because they're either decide to get off the bus or they stay on the bus. And those that stay on the bus are fully, their level of commitments jumped to 100%. If it was already 90, it's now 190. And that level of ownership that comes out the other side of those, I think, is really a beautiful thing, and hard sometimes to manufacture in just the best times where everything's just going all the time, and maybe economically everything's going great, everyone's got lots of job options, and sometimes it's actually much harder, I think, to build it in those circumstances. But throw a good crisis in there, and I think it becomes a really interesting leadership opportunity for those who see it as a transformation opportunity as leaders. That's really exciting. Well, I mean, what a transformation. I have a question for you about the transition of your GM to CEO, because one of the things, and maybe this is just, might be interesting to understand how your roles interact as chair and CEO. One of the things that I observe is that quite often general managers, if they've come up an operational chain, if they're very good at sort of running the stuff and the founder's trying to get out of the stuff, they often end up with general managers who are not sales and marketing focused so much, but are highly more, operationally literate, and they're very good at managing the things. But there's a very big difference between being a general manager or an operations manager managing the stuff and driving the business forward from a growth perspective. And so ultimately, when you take the CEO hat, okay, well, you've got the whole P&L, and that means the revenue side, not just the cost side. And now all of a sudden you have to get good at business development and strategic business development. And that can be an uncomfortable place for founders to step into a chair role, because ultimately, depending on the way that board is constructed, because naturally founders are good at strategic business development. That's how the business got going in the first place. They know the clients, they know the industry, they see the opportunities. It's like they think about it 24 hours a day. How did that occur? Did you have to train your general manager in sort of business development? Did it sort of happen by its nature? Or did you keep the strategic business development as the chair and actually have a CEO who's maybe got a bigger title but is still really running the operational side of the business? Just talk to me about that.
It's a really good question. And I think I see some of my behaviours, which, when I would previously make reports to boards or steering committees, I'd see some behaviours, and it's just like raising a kid, right? I'd go, I'm never going to be like that. Fast forward a few months and I see me sometimes exhibiting some of those very behaviours. I'm fortunate enough that when we recruited our CEO, it was early enough in the business that, as well as being, and we talk about T-shaped people all the time, right? So we really adopted this agile culture in that everybody in the company has a technical expertise, and ideally they're expert at whatever they train or have a vocation in. But they're also literally T-shaped. Their arms are out, they're willing to be as part of a team and move together as one. So it's literally and then and it comes from it actually comes from rugby, right? So in a scrum, that's what they're doing. Each of the players have a different role, but together.
So the T-shape is, the depth is the technical part, and then there's almost that, okay.
In the genesis of the company that I needed, or we needed really good community. We needed those specialists to be able to fill the roles, but they needed to have a focus on business development, understanding the client, skills in elicitation and communication. So a lot of the foundations that you would potentially have to train later were already there for Steve, our CEO. Along the journey, we've also trained all of the senior staff in sound business development practices. We've got, we pay a significant amount of money towards training in agile theory, product development, program management, but also the sales and wins, or various business development and capture activities, so that the entire company is fluent in the language. That doesn't serve to say that on promotion he did everything the way that I would do it, and he did everything the way that he would do it, because I'm also a fan of giving people the opportunity to fail in everything. And I think where we work together very, very well is we call these things Metallica moments. We create opportunities so that we can sit down and have a no fear conversation about how we're feeling, how we're treating each other, where we're feeling strong, where we're feeling weak. And it means that, in times of crisis or in times of true success, we're still brutally honest with each other. We gave them a term, Metallica moments, because I don't know if you've ever seen it. There's a documentary about Metallica making an album. It's like every documentary. It starts with fun and games, and then the train goes off the rails, and it's a complete smash. But there is this scene where the founding members of Metallica are sitting at a board table, hurling abuse at each other, like just hacking at each other. And the documentary maker independently sits down with them afterwards and said, "Look, I don't understand what's going on, because you're running one of the most successful global entertainment corporations on the planet. This was essentially a board meeting, and you were yelling and screaming at each other. How is that functional?" And one of the guys said this thing that just stuck with me straight away. He said, over 20 years or 30 years, wherever it was, we've become really good at not listening to how something's being said, and really, really good at listening at what's being said. So we, whilst it might be full of emotion, it's real, and they listen and they give each other the respect to sit through it. So I think I've got that. So whilst I've definitely got deficiencies in my skill sets, I've definitely got deficiencies in my experience, I'm comfortable talking about what they are. And I think I'd like to think, I'm pretty sure, because the relationship we've got, Steve, our CEO, is also of that view. So where he has felt uncomfortable in those areas, he's put his hand up straight away and said, "I need help in A, B, and C. You need to have that conversation, because that's not me." So it's been good. It's also meant that when he was GM, I was very much still seagulling. I was diving into the details, and I must have been driving him crazy. Now it's a lot less. So now that those board meetings and those transactions on strategy are very much that. It's an opportunity to sit and say, well, this is what I am seeing here. What are you seeing?
Critical, isn't it?
It's been good.
Super interesting. Wow. And good on him for making that transition, because also lots of general managers don't make that transition to CEO. It's a hard transition for them. Actually, all of a sudden they get the sense of the loneliness that comes with being the top dog, but it's different being a CEO who's grown up through a chain, who's not a founder, than being a founder who is naturally, sort of built to everything. Can I just ask a question about, you obviously went through a pretty significant challenge during the COVID period, managed the crisis well, but how did you were just, in the context of business development, what size was the business before COVID?
Years 18, 19, we were transitioning out of largely time materials work. We had a couple of projects, so we must have been about 20, 24 staff.
And so how did you, one of the things I know that founders really find tricky, depending on the background of the founder, is how you actually develop those. How do you imbue business development practices in a professional services firm, like getting that T-shape, getting those people to actually think about the client, ask the right questions, know what to do with it when they hear the signal or the buying opportunity or the problem or whatever. How did you, and some founders can't do that themselves. Some founders are very conscious about their process and can sort of unpack it and teach it themselves. Others, bring in consultants to sort of build a business development, methodology, I guess. How did you approach building that? Because ultimately the sustainability of businesses like this relies on that business development culture across a whole bunch of roles. How did you build your business development capability?
By doing it wrong, I reckon. So I think initially I described a business development process. It was one based on what I'd seen work at large US corporations, qualify the lead, appoint someone to very process oriented. But what I found is that the sales team were focused on the process, not focused on the client. So then we started having conversations around, well, what are we doing here? We exist to understand our clients' needs, and we exist so that these conversations turn into us solving those challenges for them. So let's focus on just becoming really, really good at understanding our customer. So we did a whole lot of work around conversations, a whole lot of work around storytelling. We do a thing called psychodramatic storytelling, which is where we'll unpack what's worked and what hasn't worked, go around the circle, and essentially come up with we don't call it psychodramatic storytelling, we call it project reviews. But essentially we get everybody into a common set of facts, right? So they all own their part of the success or failure of the story. We started encouraging everybody in the company, no matter where they sat, whether they're running a project or doing an invoice, to consider their role in the customer's journey and the problem that they might be solving on that day for the customer. We also demonstrated that, when I say we, the executive of the company demonstrated an acceptance of risk. Instead of forcing everything to come in through a central person to write a proposal or to have a meeting with a customer or to do any of those things, we started demonstrating that it is completely okay for someone to talk to a customer about what kind of proposal that we could put together. Even if it was wildly wrong, we'd be okay with that. We'd go in and say, oh, look, we don't do underwater basket weaving. That was probably an overstatement, but we do know someone who does. So we got, I think both informally by modelling the behaviours that we wanted, failing and taking the time to understand what's failing and why, all the processes, but then deliberately training people, invested in sales and marketing, business development, and agile methodology, such that everybody in the company gets certified on agile theory. Most people in the company will cycle through a series of increasingly sophisticated off-the-shelf training through a training partner for sales and marketing. I think the biggest shift, though, was at around about the same time, 2018, 19, we had the opportunity to really go hard into the product development, partly because we couldn't be on site with our customer and we needed to do something. So we started running innovation sprints so that people would validate what a particular customer concern might be. We'd form a small team and we'd come up with options. That led to us winning the next significant tranche of the FabHums product. It also led to us spinning up some software products that we were then able to release to the market. And it gave us the confidence that when we had, when we discovered that one of our significant relationships was kind of toxic, we had a customer that we just wasn't, it was increasingly obvious that it was no longer as part of this. This is all happening at the same time as our values creation, right? So we're training our staff, we're empowering staff, we're accepting more risk, we're growing in one area, and we had this toxic relationship that we just couldn't justify anymore. So without intending to, one of the biggest shockwaves that went through the company in really positive ways when we walked away from guaranteed revenue of, a significant chunk of probably 30% of the company's revenue at that time was coming out of this particular customer, and we said that's not us anymore. We're not going to do that work. Which we didn't. I don't think we realised. Steve and I and Megan and the executive didn't realise at the time that that had such a positive impact on people. We were really nervous that they're going to be saying, "Oh my God, we're in COVID, we're in recession, and these guys are leaving money on the table. What are they doing?" Instead, it just fanned those flames, and suddenly we're getting proposals from around the company, all these touch points saying, they need an extra report over here. These guys need some software. Can we go and find it for them? It was just amazing.
So good. I can't undersell the value of founders learning to say, being courageous enough to say what we're going to say no to. And in all the strategy development that I do with every client, and we build our 3-year growth strategy. So yes, we get clear on the long term and the medium term and what the strategy is going to be to get there, what we're going to double down on, or all those sorts of things. But then we also have a section that everybody can see on the sort of strategy, 1-page strategy map at the end, which says where we will and won't compete. And it's the guide rails. It's like, okay, we're going down this highway. It could take a whole bunch of different directions. We're not 100% sure, but we think it's going to go generally in this direction. But here's the edges of that road. We will not deal with these kinds of customers. We do not take this kinds of business. We aren't going into that space. And actually, in the absence of that, I think it's kind of like, I always think my natural metaphor is thinking about like children and like, your kids. You tend to, it works well when you create a bit of a box for them. It's got to be a wide enough box, and everything inside that box is good. Like, play all you like, try all these different things. There are some boundaries, but actually in the absence of those boundaries, people don't feel safe because they don't know where it ends. And they also want to see that a founder is willing to say no to stuff. That's the litmus test, right? It's like, well, if that's not part of our values, or it's not in the direction that we said we're going, and we're just going to say yes to everything, all of a sudden they lose faith that actually this stuff means anything. So I think it's super healthy and a really powerful exercise. And it sounds like, that's exactly what's happened for you and delivered some real step change in results.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because, again, all over that same period, we were seeing some policy settings in defence that essentially cut off a large chunk of our forecasted revenue. We were pushed towards being time and materials. We were pushed towards the kind of work that we didn't want to do. So because I think we'd done that work, not intentionally, COVID, no one planned on COVID, but because all that was happening at once, it meant that when those challenges hit the market, we had already pivoted. We were already doing this other thing. We were already more agile. We were already true to our core. We knew where we were going to be. We've also had this watching eye on positive impact, right? So we've been a certified B Corporation for some years, and over that same period, we again invested in what we were doing in that regard. And 2020, again, same sort of period, we ended up being honoured with the top 5% best for the world honoree in the category of governance. So there was just a whole range of things, a whole range of really good outcomes for the company that came from making mistakes, capitalising on the opportunities, as you said before, don't make a good crisis, partially by investing in people, investing in the systems. It means that now that shift, I've literally taken 6 months off almost exclusively from the company, and had complete confidence that it's going to continue to thrive. It will thrive in a different way, and it won't be that there'll be things.
Yes, it won't be the way that necessarily you would have done it, but yeah. But what I love about the rhythms, and when you are comfortable that you've actually set up, and it's not about rhythms, about just reporting. That's part of it. So yes, I've got visibility. Yes, I know what's happening. Yes, I know what could be going wrong, and yes, I know there's someone accountable for thinking about it. But actually, all of those rhythms combined together, right? That whole operating system of how we plan, how we review, how what I can expect based on the way decisions happen because of the way that we've set up our values, the way, what things get recognized, what things get rewarded. Like that whole operating system is the thing that gives you the confidence to step back as the chair and go, well, actually, I know that once that strategy, I actually know what's going to happen. Once that strategy is set, I know how it's going to flow down. I know how people get clarity. I know how they get supported. I know how they get corrective or sort of, feedback if things aren't going well, all of those things. I remember getting to that stage after probably took about 3 years in my group CEO role in the education portfolio that I built, where I remember we just finished the 5th strategic plan for the year with the leadership team of that entity. And I was so excited because I thought, I know exactly what's going to happen now. I know how this is going to flow all the way through the organization. I know exactly how it's going to operate, and I've just got to wait for the next kind of report and update to see if everything's going as I expected. It was such a liberating moment. Adam, I'm really conscious also of how long we've got, and people have a natural sort of capacity for how long they can listen to a podcast. So whilst I have 1,000 other questions, none of which actually are the ones that I sent you as hey, maybe we should talk about these things. We've talked about mostly other things, which is completely fine. But I do have one question for you. One thing I notice in professional services is sometimes people find it really challenging to scale just off organic cash flow and organic profitability just being reinvested in sales and marketing and more heads. Because, quite often you have quite expensive people, they're very technically skilled, they're usually not cheap and so on. Did you have to raise capital? Did you use any working capital facilities? How did you manage your sort of working capital to ensure you can continue to invest?
The wrong way. Once again, we just kept everything in the company. We were determined not to give any of it away initially. I was one of these founders that said, I'm never going to sell this company. It's going to be mine forever. And then didn't pay me. Well, didn't pay the company. We just paid we put all of the value of the company into those resources that were generating value for the company. So we ran almost a loss leader for a number. We ran loss leader for a number of months while it was me building what I thought was going to be the beginning of the company, and then committed that I would take I would take the minimum essential salary just to keep it moving. And we also balanced a little bit of that risk around. Ideally, it's most profitable if you own all the people. If you've recruited and you've got the money to quickly mobilize a small team to go on. We didn't. We literally started off with $100 worth of shares. So we partnered with companies and took finder's fees, and we hustled for the first couple of years, and we were very keen earlier on to collaborate because we needed to, which made us very good at it. So we founded companies that are about our size and said, hey, look, if we don't fight over these packages at work, we can grow it into larger packages at work. So we, through really deep collaborations early on, we were able to manage a lot of that risk. Would I do it the same way again? I don't think so. I think now I've learned enough about how to grow and scale that I would actually raise capital and invest in a strategy against a set line of opportunities and grow from a running start rather than grow walk, crawl, run. That's hard yards in this game.
And do you think you would, from a capital perspective, you would be likely to raise debt just against your essentially the fabric of your assets, or would you raise equity through and bring in other investment partners? How do you think you would approach it if you were to do it again?
The latter. I think once again, I think I've come to learn the true value of organization of companies like ours, especially those that can develop technology in their own right to service a customer's need or our own needs. So I would definitely be the latter. It would be describing where those business opportunities are and inviting people to join us on the journey. And we've had a couple of conversations a lot over the years. People are always courting successful small companies. And certainly my position has changed somewhat after probably the last 2 years, I've certainly softened on, the company will be mine forever. I've softened on no one gets any shares to actually, if we were to scale to the sort of most profitable, most impactful size, to be soliciting additional investors. I think, though, that changes over time, though, doesn't it? Because at the beginning, it was all about
I think
getting bigger.
Yeah. And, ultimately you get, it's comfort in how the business is operating that changes your risk appetite, because, you've got a greater level of predictability of what that cash flow is, how the business is going to be managed, how it adapts to change, all those things. In the early days, it's sort of all or nothing. Everything's on the line, and it could be succeed or fail, and it's your confidence grows, and I think your risk appetite changes over time. Adam, I have really enjoyed our conversation today. I think that's a really good place for us to leave it today. But I'm just reflecting on some of the things I've taken out of that. I support a range of professional services clients. I speak to people in professional services all the time, and I think many of them find similar challenges in the way that they grow that business, and ultimately just in services alone can be a pretty hard, just a hard slog if you never make it to a product or something that's more scalable, that's more leveraged, that solves a problem in a unique way. But actually that is the opportunity if you are in services and you deeply understand the client needs. Sounds like there's an opportunity, and certainly in the way that you build your business, to be brave. And maybe you've never built a software product before, but actually neither has anybody else in your business. But that's that great opportunity to go, you know what, we don't know how to do it, but if we know what the solution should deliver, then we can always find people to help us pull that thing together. There's always ways, as Drew's seen and as you've seen in Anywise. So I really I appreciate your time today. Is there anything that you wanted to leave us with, Adam, before we wrap up there?
No, I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity. It's really it's rare that business owners, I think, have the opportunity to talk about what they've created, but also to tap into the kind of expertise, experience that you've brought to the conversation. I've really valued the questions. I've really valued you sent through that just almost like a health checklist. How ready are you to scale? And that really was useful for me. So I've thoroughly enjoyed not only today's conversation, but the remote conversation that we had getting here. Thanks.
Thanks, Adam. And actually, for the audience, if you're wondering what Adam's talking about, I guess by now you probably will have heard, depending on when this actually goes live, I have developed something I call the Scale Scorecard, and essentially it is a diagnostic tool for founders who are looking to, usually in probably the next 3 to 7 years, they're either trying to scale up and take on some investment, or they want to step back, as Adam's done successfully. They want to be able to get back into a sort of non-operational role and install management, or they're looking for some kind of exit. And ultimately, what I've noticed over the last sort of 15, 20 years of building businesses is there is a pretty common set of things that actually, if you are to do these things, your chance of achieving any one of those 3 outcomes materially increases alongside the value, because ultimately it's building sustainable scalability. It's making the business attractive for investment, for management, for an exit. So you can actually go and check that out at www.scalescorecard.com.au. It's scalescorecard.com.au. You can jump on there and you can take that quiz or that survey for free, and it'll give you a personalized report with personalized recommendations from me based on your results. And if you want to unpack that even further, I'm offering at the moment a 45-minute growth audit session where basically I'll unpack your results with you and help you identify what from my perspective, if I was in your shoes, what I would prioritize in the next 90 days and 12 months to get momentum going in the right direction, depending on your outcome. So feel free to jump over to scalescorecard.com.au and check it out. And Adam, I look forward to remaining connected with you in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for today, Sean. It's been most enjoyable.
Thank you so much, mate. All right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.